Okay, here we are. It says that we're live. Hopefully
Great.
People will be joining us for another week of live storytelling where we get to share some of our stories, some of our personal stories that we maybe write ourselves, and maybe some other stories that we've been connected with from other parts of the world. It's been really, I know for me, lovely to have these storytelling events every single week. It's something that I really look forward to. I put in my posts on social media this week to tell people we were doing another one. Wednesday is my favorite day of the week.
Yeah.
Because it's just so great to all come together, and it does feel like we've created a bit of a community where we have some people coming back, some new people too joining us that haven't necessarily watched it before. So yeah, great to have you here, everyone who's watching. If I really look forward to hear that echo on social media. With tell people we were doing another one. Wednesday's my favorite day.
We've got a whole other conversation going on in our headphones. Yeah, that's so cool.
Video. So are you playing the video by any chance?
I can hear lots of Caylin. Gosh, it's strange, isn't it? I'm going to close all of my extra tabs in case it's anything to do with my computer. Oh, and hello Forever Green Forest School, and hello Philip over in Belgium, rainy Belgium as well. Yeah.
So neither of you are playing the video on your end, is that right?
Nope. Nothing going on.
Apologies to everybody who's watching. This is the first time we've had some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Let me.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Do you want to just see if it happens when?
So neither of you are playing the orange, is that right? I hear it on Danny's. Danny, I hear it when your video's on. Neither of you are playing the video. Right?
Yeah.
How strange. Yeah, it's Danny's, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, everybody, if you're willing to bear
for those
with
of you who are watching.
Yeah. Difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do what we can to sort it out.
Yeah, we're hearing your computer. I hear it on Danny's.
1 second. Let me just.
Danny,
maybe you can go ahead and tell the story anyway, Caylin, and we'll see if we can sort it out.
Yeah. Danny, do you want to try re-logging in, or has it worked?
Oh wow, how strange that is.
Yeah. Sorry, Danny, I hear it when your video.
I'm gonna log off and log back in.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
All right. Apologies, everybody. That was the first time that we've had technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience. That was a little rough. But Danny will come rejoin us, and we'll get going again, and hopefully not have any more issues. So we'll start here with me, Caylin, and Chris. Great to be here again. And we've got 3 stories for you. I'll tell the first story, and then we'll have Chris, and then Danny will go last. And then also, I put out some information a little earlier that we have a surprise this week. And part of that surprise is that we're getting some other storytellers that are really interested in participating in these events. And we've had one person who really wanted to be here with us today, but unfortunately just couldn't because of a work schedule, but has sent a video of them telling another amazing story. And so later today, I'm going to be sharing a bonus story in addition to the 3 stories that Chris and Danny and I share today. And just make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, and you'll get notified when that's posted. So that's exciting. And then we also have some more exciting news coming for following weeks, where we're going to be having some special guest storytellers come on with us, and we'll share more information about that a little later. So with that kind of rocky start, Chris, did you have anything that you wanted to share before we get started?
Yeah, I'd like to just tune in a little bit with us all to where we are, and I guess it's, for me, this is a bit of a gratitude, but it's also bringing our minds together. And so I'd like to just, wherever you are in the world right now, just think of the rocks beneath your feet and beneath the house or the dwelling that you're in that's supporting you, and all the plants that are nearby and the other buildings that are around, and all of that sort of support that the rocks rocks give to us all. And when those rocks break down, they make the soil, and the creatures that live in the soil that help feed the soil, and the plants that grow within it, and the birds that are hopping about busily at the moment, collecting all these insects and feeding their young, and all the bird song that's out there in the world. If we sort of think of all of these different things, it's all part of the world that we're in. And I just like to just give a little bit of thanks for that little globe that we're all part of, and that these stories somehow come out of. Where do they come from? Where is the magic that that makes these stories, that helps inspire, like Caylin's brain, for example, when she's out and about in the countryside, and little stories pop in like little story worms into her ear, and they come out, and we get a chance to listen to them. So thanks to the creativity of the universe, and the fact that we're all part of it.
Perfect.
Yeah, over to you, Caylin.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a great way to resettle ourselves to get ready for this storytelling live stream. So
cool. Well, good luck.
All right, I'll go first. Thanks, Chris. All right, everyone. So just like Chris shared, being out and about in the world gives me inspiration to write my own stories, and it really does feel a little bit like sometimes they just pop into my head, where when I'm making space to listen to it, sometimes a story just sort of emerges. And again, this week I felt inspired to write a story, but this is actually a story that I had written a year ago for a group, and it served a purpose for the group that I was with, and I wanted to retell it today, but I felt like I needed to adapt it and shift it and change it, and there were some other just things happening that I thought, I'm going to tweak this and I'm going to shift it and change it and create not a new story, but a different story. So I'm really, really excited to share this one with you. I've been saying I think it might be my favorite one. Sometimes each week I say that. Everyone is a favorite, but right now I think this is my favorite story. So the story is about a village in a valley, a beautiful, beautiful valley, and the village was called Moonlight. And the reason why it had that name was because at night, the sky was entirely dark, just a complete blanket of blackness, except for when the moon was out. And when it was a full moon, the light would shine so brightly on the village below that it was called Moonlight. And in that village, there was a wise old woman, and she was old but not frail, not weak. And she had really long silvery hair that she braided into a long braid that would rest down her back. And her name was Mara. And she was the wise woman of the village because she had a special talent. And she carried with her, almost everywhere she went, a bag of precious, beautiful stones. And those stones were passed down to Mara from her mother, who had them before her, which was passed down from her mother, who had them before her, and so on and so on and so on. And the stones held the wisdom of all the generations that had gone before. And so when there was somebody in the village with a question, they needed to find some sort of answer to a question they were seeking, they would go to Mara and they would provide some sort of gift and say, I need your wisdom. I have this question. And Mara would listen to their question, accept their gift, and then she would turn to her bag of stones. She would reach her hand inside, feel around for the right stone that held the wisdom needed at that time. And then she would bring the stone out and hold it up to her ear and listen for what it had to say. And then she'd share the answer with the person who was seeking. In this village, there also was a hill, and at the top of the hill, there lived a dragon. And it wasn't a scary dragon. In fact, this dragon was more scared than scary. And the dragon's name was Morton. And Morton lived in a cave at the top of the hill, But he was afraid of the dark. And so he wanted to find ways to light up his cave, especially at night. And sometimes he would sneak into the village when everybody was asleep, and he would find anything that sparkled or was shiny, and he would take it from the village and he would bring it back to his cave. So it would reflect the moonlight and bring light into the darkness and keep him from feeling afraid. And so sometimes the villagers would wake up in the mornings and they'd find their silverware, their metal silverware all gone, or their pots and pans or metal bowls were missing, or even sometimes the doorknobs from their doors were gone because Morton had taken it to bring it to his cave. So there was one time when Morton came into the village to look for something that could bring some light into his cave to keep him from feeling afraid at night. And as he passed by Mara's house, he saw through the window a bag resting on a table. And the bag was left just a little open that he could see a glow from inside and something sparkling and shining. And he thought, I must have that bag. And so Morton snuck into Mara's house and he picked up the bag and he took it back with him to the cave. And the next day when Mara awoke, she realized that her bag of stones was missing. And word started to spread across the village that the bag had been taken. And everybody knew that it must have been Morton, for he was really well known for taking things from the village. And so the villagers started to feel fear that the bag of stones that held all this ancient wisdom from generations before was missing. How would they find answers to their question and to the questions that they sought? And who would they go to now if Mara didn't have these stones? And so a group of the villagers decided to go get the stones back. And so they walked up the hill to the top where Morton's cave was to speak to Morton, or at least try to get them back. But Morton was inside the cave and he was protecting the stones. He was holding them tight and he didn't want to let them go. And so one of the villagers, a man, said, I know that Morton's not that scary. I'm just going to go and get the stones. I'm just going to go in, walk into the cave, and I'm going to pick them up. I'm sure it'll be fine. So this man marched straight in, and as he got closer and closer to Morton, Morton started to feel afraid. And so he started to growl, a really low growl. And as the man got closer and closer and closer to him, Morton snorted and flames shot out of his nostrils. And that scared the man and it made him fall backwards. And then he picked himself up and ran out of the cave and ran all the way back down the hill to the village. So the villagers realized they couldn't just go and get the stones from Morton. They had to find another way. And so there were two sisters who said, we have a plan. We have an idea. Let us try. And so they approached the cave, and one of the sisters hid behind a big boulder that was just by the entrance of the cave. And the other sister went to the front and started to speak really sweetly to Morton and say, hi, Morton. It's so great to see you here. You're such a beautiful dragon. I'd love to get to know you more. And she started saying all these really pleasant, nice things. And it was really flattering Morton. And he felt like, oh, this is nice. Somebody wants to talk to me. And as he was distracted by the sister who was giving him all of these compliments, the other sister that was hidden behind the boulder snuck into the cave while Morton wasn't looking. And she was able to get the bag of stones and pick them up and start to tiptoe her way out of the cave. But just as she got to the exit, she stepped on a stick. Crack! And it made a loud noise, and Morton turned around. He saw her, it scared him, and he shrieked, ah! And it shot flames out of his mouth at the sister. And she screamed too and dropped the bag of stones and ran off back to the group of villagers. Again, unsuccessful at getting the bag of stones. So they were all pretty exhausted at that point and didn't have another plan. And so they went back to the village and they told Mara what had happened. They said, we tried to get these stones back, but we couldn't. Every time that we've approached Morton, it scares him and he shoots out these flames and we can't get close. And so Mara said, let's leave it for today. Let's all take a rest. Let's sleep tonight and we'll figure it out tomorrow. And so all the villagers went to bed. But Mara stayed up. And she went outside and she looked up at the sky, the dark, dark, dark sky, but it was a night with a full moon. And she gazed up at the moon, and as she looked at it and its light, the answer came to her. She knew what needed to be done. And so she herself, while everyone else was asleep, walked her way up to the top of the hill, to the cave where Morton was also asleep. He was in there, wrapped up, curled up really tightly, with his head resting on the bag of stones, not wanting anyone to get it from him. And Mara knew that she couldn't scare him. She needed to do something that would keep him calm. And so instead of walking into the cave or talking to him or even trying to sneak up on him, she decided to sing him a little song. And this is the way the song went. She said, "The moon has shone, dragon, bring the stones." And Morton heard the song with his head resting on the bag of stones, and he opened one eye, wondering what that could be. And so Mara decided to sing it again. She said, "The moon has shone, dragon, bring the stones." And Morton, with his head resting on the stones, opened the second eye, opened widely, curious about what this song was and who it was coming from. And again, she sang it for the third time. And if anybody's at home and wants to sing it with me, feel free to join in. "The moon has shone, dragon, bring the stones." And Morton lifted his head up, and he knew that this was an important person that had come to the cave, that he must go see what it was about. And he picked up the bag of stones, and he walked out to the cave, and he saw Mara there with her silver hair shining in the moonlight, with a really kind face. And he knew that he didn't need to be afraid. And so he approached her with the stones, and she gently walked up to him, and she whispered something in his ear. And as she whispered, his eyes widened, as he knew something special was about to happen. And so he gave the bag of stones to Mara. And he came out again holding a copper metal bowl, one of the bowls he had taken from the villagers before to reflect the moonlight. And he set it on the ground. And then Mara emptied the stones into the metal bowl. And they all rested there, glimmering in the light of the moon. And then Mara encouraged Morton to approach the bowl, and he started to breathe a little bit of his fire onto the stones. And as he breathed his fire, they started to glow more and more and more like little embers. And he breathed a little more flames until they were glowing so, so brightly. And then Mara handed him the bowl, and he knew what he needed to do. He picked it up, and he flew up into the sky, holding the bowl. And with the flaming stones, he started to scatter them one by one into the blackness of the sky all around the moon, so they could shine brightly from all over. And then Mara returned to the village. And the next morning when the villagers came out, they asked what they were going to do about the stones. And Mara said, "We don't need to go retrieve them. It's all been taken care of." And the villagers were confused, saying, "Well, how do we access the wisdom of the generations before us if we don't have the stones?" And Mara said, "You don't have to go through me any longer. The wisdom is available now for all of us. All we have to do is look up at the night sky, and you'll see all the stones glowing in the sky, each one now acting as stars." And everyone said, "But what about Morton? What's happened to Morton?" And she said, "He's now taken on the special role to take care of all that wisdom for us. And every night he flies around and he keeps all of the stones glowing for us to be able to see, keeps them shining brightly." And so that is the story of how the stars came to be alongside the moon in the night sky. And you can still see them today and still access the wisdom by listening to the stars and paying attention to them at night when they're out. And sometimes you can also see Morton because he's still flying around in the night sky today. And occasionally he likes to move stones from one place to another. And so you'll sometimes see a streak a star moving across the sky. And that's Morton taking the stones from place to place when he wants to move them around. All right, that's my story.
Fabulous. Beautiful. Love it. That was so lovely.
Thank you.
So lovely. What a beautiful story that was. And it's the first bit, but it got in just as we were learning about the stones. Beautiful. Really well written. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fun one. And I keep these stones on a windowsill. And some of them are ones that have been given to me, and occasionally I do collect a beautiful stone that I find that feels special. And so it just felt like a cool thing to be able to share them with people today too.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The names of the dragon and is it Mara? Where are they? So is there a story behind the names?
That's a great question. And the Morton the dragon was the original story that didn't have a character named Mara. And I don't know where Morton came from. It just was something that popped into my head. And actually the first version of the story that I had written for a group of kids was a little more silly. It was more, it was about like a scared dragon who would shriek and scream and that kind of thing. And I just felt like Morton was a name that fit with that. And then when I decided to call the village Moonlight, I think the M theme stuck with me, where I wanted the old wise woman to have a name that started with M, and Mara was just something that came to mind. Yeah.
It's nice. I like it. I'm always interested in names in stories when people write their own, whether it's an old teacher or an old relative that they put their name in or not. So I was just curious because Morton's quite an unusual name. What a great name for a dragon.
Yeah, definitely. Scandinavian theme. And so many sort of things that we could do off the back of that story. I mean, and there's a few things in that story that really spoke to me as well, that they partly because right at the moment I've got a teenage son who really doesn't want to go to bed at 11 o'clock. He's 13 and he used to go to bed at 9:30, or at least get ready to bed, that sort of stuff. But now we're getting to this point of confrontation because he doesn't really need to be going to sleep, really. He doesn't need to be going out, getting up. And it feels like he's a bit like my dragon at the moment. And I've got to find this way of, I can't just kind of bully him into going to bed. I can't just be really, really nice and go along with everybody wants. There's got to be this way of encouraging him to make the right choice, and that it's okay to go to sleep. So there's that thing of conflict resolution and how to find a solution when somebody's taken something of yours. Or I was just thinking of kids this afternoon that I was working with as well, that when they've stolen something off, one child had taken a rope off one of the other children. It was like, how do we get them back? We've got to find a nice way to do that. And then also I was thinking about sneaking games as well. There's tiptoeing up. That's something that people can do in their homes. You don't have to have a garden. You can play sneaking games in your house, can't you?
Yeah.
Sneaking up on a little bag of crisps or something. That's quite noisy. It's got little treasures inside it.
Yeah.
What spoke to you, Danny, apart from the names?
Just the idea of going out and looking at the stars for meaning. That struck with me at the end. Where just that we've been doing a lot of cloud watching these last few days, just sitting in the window and watching the clouds and coming up with different shapes and trying to build stories around that. We love to go out at night and watch the stars, but I have a 4-year-old daughter, so at the moment it's difficult because we have the same challenge as you, Chris, just with a 4-year-old. So of course it's getting darker later, so we don't get to see the stars as much. But we love doing that, and I love that idea of going out and finding meaning up there, whether it's in the clouds or in the stars or just something that speaks to us and engages our curiosity and helps spark our imagination and bring stories out of us. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I've been paying attention to the stars a lot lately. I see them from my window at night. And I just remembered as a kid, I used to be outside at night a lot more. I grew up in Hawaii, so it wasn't cold anytime. So being out at night was a year-round thing. And I just always used to see the stars. And I also lived in a place without much light pollution. And I've just been reminded recently, just being able to see the stars from my window, of how important they were to me. And wanting to reconnect with that. So I thought I'd write a story about it.
It's almost like I find looking up at the night sky, when you get a really good night sky with no light pollution, I sometimes liken it to sitting and gazing into a fire. You can it just feels like it's forever just evolving in front of me. And the idea of either getting lost in it or something drawing, a deeper, like a depth of understanding in something that we can't really see or comprehend or understand. So yay for the night sky. And
this is also my first time singing live in public like this. I was terrified.
Yay for courage as well. Good for you.
Yeah, well done.
You can hear my voice shaking a little bit, part of it. Oh my gosh, I'm singing in public.
To all over the world.
There we go. Gotta try it.
Good for you. Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I joined in on the third one.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
So I was singing with you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you both. All right. Are we ready for the next story? Chris, you up?
Yeah, I'm up next. Good. So
good luck, Chris.
This is an udu drum. And I just brought it along because I would like to play an introduction to the song with this udu drum. This is made from some clay. And it's one that I was lucky enough to make with my wife's dad, who is a potter, and he taught us how to make it. And when I fired it, this whole neck exploded off, and it was left in quite a few pieces. So I spent about 4 hours doing this 3D jigsaw to fix it all back together again. And I've painted over all the joins, but it works quite well. Very, very grateful for this. This story is about strength because I wanted to tell it this week because I was working with the children last week. I'm doing 1 day a week, doing some forest school stuff, and we were just talking about strength and different kinds of strengths. And there is this story about strength, which originally, I believe, comes from West Africa. And I've sort of transmuted it to some of the creatures that live in this country. And at the end of it, we can have a little talk about different kind of strengths. Anyway, here we go. Well, one afternoon, all the animals were a bit bored. And they wondered what to do. So they gathered in a big meadow and they decided that the best thing to do was to play hide and seek. And they played the game of hide and seek. And, well, Mole kept on winning, but that's for another story. So I'll have to tell that another time. But at the end of the game, they were still like, oh, well, what should we do? What should we do next? Well, Woolly Mammoth said, well, I think we should have a strength competition. The animal said, yeah, let's have a strength competition. Let's have a strength. Well, who's going to do what? Well, they all sort of thought for a moment, what were their strengths? And so the first one to go was Badger. And Big Badger decided, I am strong. There's no one stronger than me. And he sort of trotted off to some earth and he got out his claws and he started to dig. And he dug and he dug and he dug. And within a couple of minutes,
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think your mic is hitting the instrument and making a lot of noise that's making it hard to hear. I'm sorry to butt in. I just wanted to make sure people could hear you.
Yeah, no, do good. Thank you very much. I couldn't hear that. And so yes, with all that sort of noise that the manager was making with his microphone, he did loads of digging, and in no time at all, he dug this huge hole in the ground, and he stood back a little bit, and he looked at it, and he said, "Look, everybody, look at this, I am strong." And the animals went, "Yeah, we are strong. No, we are strong. There's no one stronger than us." And so the next animal said, "Well, I'm fast." So the hare said, "I'm so fast that I can run and zigzag all the way across this meadow. Nobody will be able to catch me." And so the animal stood back, and the hare went zoom, 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 zoom. He went this way and that so fast that they could hardly see him moving through the grass. And he came back also a bit puffed out. He said, I am strong, there's no one stronger than me." And the animal said, "That was brilliant, you're so fast. Yay, we are strong." They chanted and they got very excited. And then the dung beetle said, "Well, I may not be fast, but I am so strong. Look how strong I am." I don't know if you know this, but dung beetles can push up to 1,000 times more than their body weight. So this tiny little dung beetle, he just picked up this big ball of poo and he pushed it through the grass. And the animals were amazed at this very small creature pushing this huge ball across the grass. "I am strong. There's no one stronger than me," said the little beetle. And the animals said, "Yes, that was so good. We are strong. We are strong. There's no one stronger than us." Well, the woodpecker said, "I've got a different kind of strength. I've got this really strong beak. Look how quickly I can dig into trees. Look how strong I am." So he flew to this sort of dead-ish silver birch tree, and he got halfway up and he started tapping away into this hole. And before long, all these little bits of chunks of wood falling out and down onto the ground around him. Soon his whole head had disappeared inside the tree, and then with a huge clunk, the top of the tree just fell off, splat, narrowly missing the mouth. Wow, the animals, they said, "Yeah, you are strong, you are strong." And the woodpecker, he felt so proud. Well, the snake, there was a big python there as well, and the python said, "Look, I'm strong. I've got a slow strength." And he slithered over to the huge branch or the top of the tree that had fallen off, and he wound himself round it and round it and round it. And then he started to squeeze, and he squeezed ever so slowly. But the animals, they listened and they could hear the wood cracking, and it was splintering on the inside. And then in a moment, suddenly it crumbled to dust, and the snake moved away, and the animals, "Wow, you are so strong. Wow, we are strong. We are so strong. Who's going to go next?" And the mammoth said, "Well, it's my idea to have this game. Look how strong I am. I can just push trees over." And he went over to this big tree, and he leaned against it, and the tree just creaked and groaned and crunched to the ground. "Whoa," said the animals, "that is so strong." I am strong, and no one stronger than me," said the mammoth. "Well, we are strong," said the animal. "We are strong." And one of the trees spoke up, and the tree said, "Well, look how strong I am. Look how much of all these branches I can hold up." And the animals thought, "Oh yeah, plants are strong as well. Wow, we are strong. We are so strong." And then the human came up and he said, "Well, look, I'm really strong. Look, I've got really big muscles, and I've got them on my legs too, and I can jump up and down." And he started doing cartwheels and doing press ups and looking how strong I am. And the animals thought, yeah, you got muscles, but it's not that strong. What else can you do?" "Oh, I'm strong. I'm strong like a monkey." And he climbed up the tree, and he got the end of the tree, and he sort of the bendy tree, and he tried to bend it round, and it snapped, little bits broke off. And then he climbed down the tree, and he climbed up another one, and he found some nuts up there, and he started throwing them down on the ground. I am strong. And the animals looked at him and said, "Yeah, squirrels can climb trees. They can thrown up to down. Not really strong. I mean, what can you do? And the human who's starting to get really cross. And he ran off to the bushes and he came out with his bow and arrow and he took aim at a big deer. He pulled back the bow and arrow and he shot the deer straight into the forehead. The deer fell to the ground. I am strong. I'm. Huh? And he looked around and all the animals had disappeared. They'd run off into the forest. Oh, I'm strong. No one's stronger than me, he thought to himself. Well, the animals had all gone off and hid. They all gathered round and they started talking. They said, was that strong? Was that strong? What do you think? No, that wasn't strong. That's death. That's death. Humans, that man, he doesn't know the difference between death and strength. Well, and from that day onwards, don't know if you've noticed, but lots of animals, they don't really walk around and hang about with humans anymore because they say that it's partly could be because humans don't really know the difference, or some of them don't anyway, know the difference between strength and death. What do you think? And what's your strength? You know what it is. Sometimes you need someone else to tell you what it is. Anyway, that is the story of strength. Thank you very much for listening. There we go.
Nice
so there's the story about strength.
I love that. I hadn't predicted that coming at the end. I was thinking, where is it going, this story? And then it was perfect. Really lovely. Really lovely moving. Yeah. I love that. I love the instrument as well.
Yeah, apart from the clattering noise at the beginning. Sorry about that, folks.
It was great. I thought it was good sound effects for the badger's claws as it was digging these.
Yeah, it was. The parts of the story it definitely added.
Yeah.
Good. I see John Cree has written there. Aha, another poo story.
I thought that as well. When you mentioned the dung beetle, I thought,
yeah,
Chris with his poo stories again.
Yes, that's just cheap jokes. That's all.
I love the comparison of the animals and thinking about the different strengths and roles that the animals take. And also how humans factor into that, and the way that we think about ourselves versus the way we think about other animals, and vice versa potentially too. And also it gave me inspiration thinking about, as a child or even as an adult, playing out the different animals, like getting to pretend to be the different animals and thinking about what your body would be like if you were a certain type of animal and how you might move. And I just thought that could be a fun thing to do is choose a handful of animals that maybe are familiar to you or not, and see what it's like to act them out, to be like
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's what we ended up doing the other week, actually, was just sort of doing these kind of animal forms across the playground and pretending to sort of try and push over trees, going up against trees and pushing them over and things like that. We obviously didn't push any trees over. It was fun trying anyway.
I like how the story brings up that question of how we can regain the trust of animals as well. And why do animals always run away from us? I used to see that, and I've tried to explain that to the children that I work with. Why do they always run away? Because of the young children in particular, they just want to be friendly to them, but they scamper. And how do we regain their trust? Just this week, I've been doing my morning walk, and I see 2 deer. And as the week's gone on, I've just tried to be patient with them and still, and try and build a connection from a distance. And as you said that with the shot, I'm more understanding of their distance now after that story. So how do we?
There's a place, I've talked about this in some other places, I don't think through the storytelling live stream, but there's a place I go for a walk to near where I live right now that is an area where people often feed the birds. It's in a very forested, wild area. And so it's all wild birds, but they get fed a lot by people, and a lot of people come out with holding the food in their hands. And so the birds are so used to people and so used to friendly people, encounters that are positive with humans and not negative, that the first time I ever went there, I had no idea that this was a thing. I didn't know people fed the birds. And so when I walked up, they just came. It was like a dog greeting you at the door when you came home. With
Amazing.
Chickadees and nuthatches and like coming to, I felt like Snow White, like catching birds in my hands.
Wow.
It just made me think, imagine if that's the way we interacted with animals every day.
Yeah.
What our world, what our experience would be like out and about if that was the interaction that animals were used to.
Yeah. That'd be so cool, wouldn't it? If there was a sort of tradition, more of a tradition of that. Well, there must be. There's lots of traditions of that in different places around the world, and it'd be just nice to see more of it. Yeah, gosh, how cool is that? Especially unexpectedly to come upon that.
Yeah,
how magic it must have been.
The squirrels come too, not just the birds.
The squirrels?
Yeah.
I see that here in the UK sometimes, where the squirrels will run right over. And I remember being out with Annie walking in the park, and the squirrel came and ran straight up her leg, kind of hanging on her side. Like, hey.
That's great.
The key to reconnecting with those animals is food.
Yeah.
Plenty of food. Push through their bellies.
And patience and kindness.
Food and patience. Yeah.
Great. Well,
on to the next one.
Ready for the next story, Danny? Leave it to you. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, I think I'm telling a story.
You're having another. All right. Hey, so I'm going to tell you a story that is about death. And before I tell that story, I just want to give people a chance to choose whether you want to hear a story about death or whether you want to read and pick up another part of your own.
Danny, sorry, the sound is weird today. You were fine just before we set you off, but then it's got this weird, like you're in a bubble.
I don't know what it could be.
You sound fine right now. Let me remove my phone.
Fine now.
That helps.
Okay. Is that any better? Can you hear me? Can someone give me a thumbs up in the private chat or something? Is that? Yay, good.
Yeah,
oh no,
you're good.
We're good. All right, let's do it. Okay, so I'll start again. So the stories that Chris and Caylin and I tell are often nature stories, and this story is a nature story as well, but it's a story about death. And there's a bit of a disclaimer. If you want to listen to the story about death, you can, but if you're having troubled time with death or anything at the moment, then leave, and you can come back at your own will once at the recording. So this is a story about death, and this is a story that I learned about 20 years ago in a big open meadow in New Hampshire. And I was told this story by a good friend of mine, an Australian called Lachlan, who is an accountant, a storyteller, a firefighter, a personal trainer, and a great educator as well. So I owe this story to him. And it's a story from a time when all the lands close to here were divided into kingdoms, and each kingdom had a king. And this particular kingdom that the story is set in had a king who lived in his castle with his daughter, his princess. Now, sadly, the king's wife, the queen, had died, and it was just him and his daughter. And his daughter was the most precious thing that he had in his life, more precious than all of his lands and all of his castles. She was the most important thing to him. And they had a very, very, very strong relationship. And every morning they would wake and they would go out onto the castle balcony, and they would look across their lands and share breakfast. And it was a little special moment that they had every day. But one morning, the king woke and he went to his daughter's room to wake her to have this morning ritual. But when he went into her room, she was lying there in bed, totally still. Her long blonde hair had turned an ashen grey, and her skin was very, very pale. It was clear that she was seriously ill. And he called for the servants. He said, my daughter is seriously ill. We must do something to revive her. And they called for the doctor, the best doctor in the whole of the kingdom. And the doctor came and he went into the room and he looked at the king's daughter and he examined her. And when he came out, he took the king to one side. He said, "King, I am so sorry. This is an illness like no other illness I have seen before. I don't know any medicine in this world that will cure your daughter. And sadly, she has maybe 1 week left to live." With this news, the king was very, very, very sad. The doctor left and the king sat by his daughter's bed and he began to weep. And he thought to himself, there must be something that can be done. And he called his best horseman. And he said to his best horseman, "Take your fastest horse, ride around the whole kingdom and spread the word to all the doctors, the witches, the wizards. Tell them, if anybody can save my daughter from this terrible illness, I will repay them with a bag of golden stones." Now, the man got on his horse and he headed out and he went around the whole kingdom and he spread the news as far as he could. And then they waited. And the next day, people began to arrive at the castle and they would come in, doctor after doctor, nurse after nurse, wizard after witch. And they all took a look at the daughter and they all left shaking their head with the same words: "Nothing can be done. This is an illness that we know nothing of." And another day went and another day went and people stopped coming. And the king sat again with all of his worries and all of his woes. Surely somebody in this hour of need could help. And the next day he had almost given up hope. He was sat and he heard a noise. It was a knocking at the castle door. And he went out to the castle door and he opened the castle door and he looked around. Who could it have been? And whilst he was looking around, he felt something pulling on his trousers. And when he looked down, there at the floor was a tiny little goblin. The ugliest goblin you could possibly imagine, with a crooked nose and a wonky chin and cobweb hair. And the king looked at him and he said, can I help you? And the goblin said, "I have come to save your daughter." And the king said, "Are you a doctor or a wizard or?" The goblin said, "No, I am not a doctor or a wizard, but I have a gift like no other." Now the king was unsure about this. This little ugly goblin didn't look like he had any gifts at all. So the king said, "Well, what is your gift?" And the goblin said, "I can see death." The king said, "But how will that save my daughter?" And the goblin said, "I can see death and I can save your daughter, but I don't want your gold. You keep your gold. You promise me that if I save your daughter, you will give me her hand in marriage." Now the king was in a difficult situation all of a sudden. He had this ugly little goblin creature who said he could save his daughter, but in saving his daughter, he would have to give his daughter to the goblin in marriage. And the king thought for a moment, but he realized he didn't have an option. It was either this or he would lose her forever. So he invited the goblin in. He said, "Come in." If there is a way that you can save my daughter, I will give her hand to you in marriage. He said, tell me, what is your plan? So the goblin went up to the room and he looked into the room, and the princess's daughter was in the center of the room. And the goblin said, I can see death. And when death comes to take people, he always goes down the right side of the bed. The goblin said, I shall hide on the right side of the bed, and when death comes to take your daughter, I will capture death, and he will be gone forever. And your daughter will be rescued. So the king agreed. And that night, the goblin hid behind some curtains on the right-hand side of the bed, and he waited. And as midnight came and the clock struck 12, the wind picked up and the window panes began to shake. And then up the stairs came the footsteps of death. And the door swung open. And there stood at the bottom of the bed was death. This big black cloak with a big black hood, carrying a big wooden staff. And death walked to the edge of the bed. And his long bony hand reached down and pulled the cover back as he looked at the princess. He stepped back. The goblin was holding its breath. Would death go to the left or to the right of the bed? Another moment passed, and death stepped to the right and began to walk down the side of the bed. The goblin began to sweat. This was his moment. He had his bag ready. As death leaned over to take the princess, the goblin jumped out and put death into the bag. There was a huge fight as death tried to get away, but the goblin got a rope and tied it around the bag and held it up, for there was death trapped inside the bag. The goblin ran downstairs. He said to the king, I have death, I have death. Give me your strongest horse and I will be rid of death forever. So the king called for the strongest horse, and the goblin got on the horse, and the goblin rode out of the castle, through the fields, into the forest, over the hills, until he came to a big pine forest. There he found the tallest tree, and he climbed up to the top of the tallest tree, and he tied death in a bag. And he climbed down, and he returned back to the castle. And when he arrived, he went into the princess's room, and there she was. Her colour was back in her cheeks. Her hair had returned to gold. And she was better. The goblin was right. Now, when the king told the princess of the agreement, she wasn't very happy to begin with, but she was grateful to the goblin, for without him, she would surely have died. So a huge wedding was arranged, and the goblin married the princess, and life carried on. But the goblin was always worried. He had everything that he could want. He had a kind and loving wife. He had a huge castle. He had the respect of the kingdom. But he also had the fear of death. He was afraid that one day death would escape and come after him. And even though he had everything he wanted, he couldn't live a full life because he was afraid of death. But after a while, something began to happen in the kingdom. You see, because there was no death, illness began to spread. Disease began to spread. And there was no death to take the sick. There was no death to take the ill and the very, very, very old. And as disease spread, the whole health of the kingdom began to collapse. People went to the king. They said, we can't live like this. Death is an important part of life. We must bring death back from the forest. And the king knew what a big ask this was. How could they possibly bring back death? The king didn't even know where death was. So he called the goblin. He said to the goblin, "We cannot live in these ways. Death is an important part of life. We must bring death back. Only you know where death is." And the goblin said, "I will not go. I cannot release death. He will strike me down. There is no way. I will not go." And the king looked at the goblin. And the king said, "I am not asking you to get death. I am telling you, this is an order of the king." And the fastest horse was brought. And the goblin got on the horse and he rode slowly out, filled with a tremendous fear. He rode through the fields and over the hills and through the forest till he came to the big pine forest. And there he climbed the tree. And at the top was death in the bag. He took the bag. He climbed back down to the bottom. And at an arm's length, he untied the bag. And as he untied the bag, death came shooting out of the bag. "How dare you? How dare you hide me away in these trees?" And the goblin looked. He said, "Make it quick. Make it painless." And death rose his huge hand and he came down with all of his force. But just as he reached the goblin's head, he stroked his hair. He said, "Oh no, goblin, I will not take your life, for you will remain immortal. And you will live with fear of me. Go, be gone." And with that, the goblin left. And death claimed that he would never take the goblin. And death returned to the kingdom and he began his work. And death brought balance back. The death was removed, health returned. But still to this day, that goblin roams the hills as a reminder to us that living in the fear of death stops us from living our life to the full. And that's the end of the story.
I love it. I love the little thing at the end. Yes, fear of death stops us living life to the full. Definitely.
Yeah. I love the character of the goblin too, and especially your impression of it and the voice.
He nearly broke my throat a couple of times. I don't know if you know. I thought I was going to lose my voice when I was doing that.
Just thinking of that character and all the things that we tend to avoid, like thinking about what the goblin looks like and the way he's described, and are things that we tend to be like, oh, you know, even thinking about other animals or creatures that we look at and discuss, and you know, sometimes that's worms or spiders, and like, oh, and wish they would just go away, and just what the significance of them as having a role too. Just thinking about that. That we tend to try to like pretend that bad stuff, or those things that we don't like don't exist, or we try to make them go away. But in the end, it's all part of it.
I think it's always really difficult as a storyteller and a writer of stories as well, because I'm really mindful of who are the villains and what stereotypes are we like playing along with, and how do we break them, and should we have villains or should we not have villains? And I think it's something that's always in my mind. And yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure. It's like when we did the happiness tree last week and there was a witch, you know, and I really struggled with the idea of witches always being villains in stories, but it's so hard to develop a new type of villain who doesn't have a stereotype attached. One thing that I can think of is when Julia Donaldson does it with the Gruffalo. And the Gruffalo is just but she spends the whole story explaining who the Gruffalo is. So how do we get a quick fix villain into a story without it taking a novel to write it. But yeah, I
think that, you know, we're all made of multiple sort of archetypes, you know, and you know, and each one has a good and a bad side to it, or a light and a shadow side to it. So yeah, I think it's when there are villains in stories, it's good to look at the shadow sides of ourselves, and also what's the good side of it, if possible, as well.
Yeah.
You know, I like that in your story that you told there, you know, about the goblin. Definitely, he's got multiple sides to him, hasn't he?
Yeah.
But thankfully he's quite small. And
very small.
Yeah.
Short legs, not good at running.
Yeah. That's such an image of him sort of, you know, hanging there on your ankles as you're trying to sort of get him off and shake him off, and he's just grasping on.
Yeah, I love that. When I first heard that story, I loved that vision of the king and looking out for who's banging on my door, and then this goblin pulling at his trouser, like, But just to say a little bit, I mean, just to say to people who are listening that we spoke about that story this week, emailed a little bit, and I was in two minds whether or not to share it because it can be a sensitive topic, but certainly in our culture, there's very few opportunities to talk about death, and story can be a great way to introduce people to difficult topics, or to just help people make sense of the world and sense of these concepts such as death. So I think as a story, it has really important value in terms of opening the door for a discussion about that, and also kind of breaks that idea that all death is bad as well, because it's just part of the cycle of life. And I think when we understand that, certainly other cultures fully understand that and grasp it and embrace it and treat death very differently to our culture. So I'm glad that I got a chance to share that, even though I was a little nervous about sharing it.
Yeah,
I think you're really right too.
Yeah, and it got me thinking too about just tying it even to being able to think about those cycles within the world around us. And I just thinking back on maybe the first time that I really started to understand as a child, this is just a first memory, was when I was really attached to a marigold plant that my parents had bought me. And it was dying, and I was so just grieving the loss of this marigold, wanting to do everything I could to restore it. I must have been probably about 5. I don't know. Can't really remember how old I was, but I was young. And they felt bad that I felt bad. And so they snuck out, bought a new marigold that was in the same type of pot, and replaced it overnight. And so I went out the next day, saw my marigold's back. But when I really looked at it, because I knew my marigold really well, I could tell it wasn't the same one. And it didn't fix the problem. I was even more devastated, saying, where did the other one go? Like I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. It had been put on the compost pile, and that was even more, devastating to me. I couldn't even pay attention to the fact that there was this new live marigold in front of me. It was like that the other one had gone. And so thinking about even the connection to the plants, that even a house plant, a potted plant that's in your house, and watching its cycle, and connecting with the cycles that we can witness outside too, with insects, or especially those life cycles that are really quick, and doing part of our programs or with our families, getting to explore that cycle a little bit more experientially.
I did a program last year with young adults who had experienced grief, and we used nature connection to connect with the grief cycle, and it was a really, really powerful program. I did it alongside some psychologists that we work with, but using nature in that way to help people deal with grief, it can be a really, really powerful tool. I think we may see more of that in the future in terms of
I think so too.
nature connection and psychology and grief, and bringing them all together.
I also want to speak to the fear that I think adults have about death and bringing up topics of death, with children. And I think that might necessarily be the goblin in the grown-ups, because children can be a lot more sort of matter of fact about death than grown-ups can be. They treat it with what's the word? Sort of curiosity and realness. And I don't think we should shy away from talking about death, with children. And and they are the ones that will go and pull the legs off spiders, and then we have that to deal with when we're dealing as outdoor educators. Do we stop children from doing that kind of thing, or do we carry on? Or do we let the children carry on? And that's part of learning about life and death, isn't it?
Yeah, I had one of my most worthwhile forest school sessions that I've ever had was I was setting up my site and I found a dead wood pigeon that was still warm. It had broken its neck. It had just flown into a tree. So I just left it.
As only a wood pigeon could.
yeah. But I just left it and waited for the kids to arrive and see what would happen and see if they'd find it and see how they'd interact. And it was amazing. And they found it, and we looked at the anatomy of it, and they wanted to give it a name, and then they wanted to give it a funeral, and some kids were saying, I'll write a eulogy and we'll do some music and we'll walk as a procession. And somebody said, I'll square lash a cross for the grave, and just all these just totally led by the children, but all these skills that they developed just came out of nowhere. And it was for me one of the nicest experiences where, as a forest school leader, I just did nothing. I just left it and let nature be the guide. And it was a really organic, beautiful session. Where a lot of people would have just put it in a bag and said, oh, it's death, we can't let the children see that. So when you work outside, you can only do so much. I feel like I've had so many similar experiences too, where you inevitably will come across something that has died if you're working outside. And it sort of makes you acknowledge that it is just part of it. And you're absolutely right, Danny, that it becomes the teacher. You take less of a role in having to explain it, and which can feel really challenging and really tough, particularly amongst, a diverse group of learners who have different cultures and different belief systems. And it can be a challenge, but sometimes just letting the natural world be the teacher. Yep, absolutely.
And a great impetus for people coming together as well, to have common purpose around the death. We will come to each other's need in that, in those moments.
Of course we do. Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if any of us will be touched. I'm just, in our terms of our families, over the next few months. That's a possibility that we must all face, I think.
Of course it is. Yep.
Yeah. See what happens.
Yeah.
Well.
Cool.
We've had another interesting, reflective, amazing storytelling session. This one felt a little different from the others. Technical difficulties the goblin of technical difficulties visited us this time.
It's the most unusual thing that was going on in my headphones. I actually thought for a moment that I'd lost it entirely. I typed at one point onto the chat, and then I could hear my voice saying what I had typed. And I was thinking, what? And I could hear your voice on loop, Caylin, and then yours was on loop, Chris.
Oh, yeah. I think we've been really lucky so far that these have been so good. Today was the day where everything that could have gone wrong and happened in one session. But
we got through it.
Well, it's part of the process, the good with the bad, right? We can't be perfect. And it is what it is. So a huge thank you to everybody who joined us today and stuck with us this long. I feel like each session's getting a little longer as we settle into these stories and our discussion. Like, the discussions are really rich, and it's great to have everybody here. And we are planning on doing another one next week and have a special guest who I'm anticipating will join us. So we'll have a potentially new storyteller, which is exciting. And again, get in touch if you are a storyteller and want to share your stories here, even if you feel like a beginner and it's absolutely terrifying to you, but you want to take the leap. That's exactly what I've done. Each time I come with the fear of telling a story, I do a live stream, and I just do it anyway. And it's been really wonderful as a learning experience to improve my skills as a storyteller. So the invite is out for anyone else who might want to try that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, Chris, Danny, anything else to share before we sign off?
No, just a big thanks to everyone again for stopping by. It's really lovely that you're all there.
Yeah, thanks for dropping by. And go blessings. I hope you all have a good week until next week, or a fortunate week.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, take care, everyone. Keep in touch. And the bonus story as well, quickly. There's a bonus story I'm going to be releasing on the channel from another person who wanted to be with us who couldn't be on the live stream. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to get the notification when that's up later on. Okay, take care, everyone.
See you all.
Bye.